Hey, it's Nikki, and this is How to Be Political on a Tour. And I know many tour guides shy away from politics, and some tour operators even direct guides to stay away from politics. But I talk often about the power that a guide has and the responsibility of being an ambassador for your city or country or region. And of course, one guide does not and cannot speak for everyone. But often, guests on a tour want to hear the guide's local opinion and insight. They're curious about what their guide thinks and eager to get a first-hand opinion as opposed to some news articles that they read. And I think there's no reason why a guide can't dip into those waters in a way that won't erupt an entire tour into political debate chaos, which is not what anyone wants, right? So, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that every guide, every tour must get into controversial politics unrelated to their tour. I'm not. When I train guides, I make it very clear that they have the option not to get into it, which is perfectly reasonable. But if you are willing to go there, you should have solid tools and guidelines of how to do that. So in this article, I'll list a few rules that guides should keep in mind if you want to give your personal opinion about politics on a tour. Firstly, know what you're talking about. This might seem obvious, but when giving your personal opinion, you should really know what you're talking about. The more controversial, the more well-versed you should be of both sides of the argument. You should know stats, precedents, the different stances, the fuller history of the issue itself. With knowledge comes assertiveness, which makes it easier and more professional to talk about things in that way. And more importantly, it gives you the ability to talk about a topic that you're strongly passionate about objectively, which is important. Secondly, know your audience. If the topic is really touchy and unrelated to your tour theme in general, you'll want to read the room before diving in. And you have to remember that while you can always plant the seeds of knowledge, you're not guaranteed to change someone's beliefs. You don't actually have control over that. So in a previous job, we ran tours in Washington, D.C., where guides would actively lead discussions about politics. Those guides are my heroes. And it was crazy to think, but you have to remember, in a time in the US where politics are very strong, that could be a horrible result. But because the guests had actively signed up for the tour, knowing ahead of time what they were going into, it worked. To give you another example, one of my tours used to pass a New York City courthouse that's famous for like a city hall wedding. So if you get, a city hall wedding in New York City, it's at that courthouse. And occasionally during the year that the Marriage Equality Act was passed in New York City, a guest would often ask me about LGBTQ plus marriage in New York City. Whether or not I would go into the discussion of marriage equality in New York City with the guest would depend entirely on how they asked that question or what specific question they asked. So, for example, if someone came up to me and in front of the entire group kind of said very boldly, well, do you believe it's okay to get married if you're gay? If this is someone I can already tell does not approve of that and they're looking for a debate, in this case, I would not get into it. I would make a comment about personal opinions not being relevant now that a law is passed, and then quickly divert, by going into New York City's history of civil rights or something related, moving into safer topics and moving on. However, if someone came up to me alone while we were walking, away from the courthouse and asked if LGBTQ plus marriage was legal, I would be happy to go into the law and the LGBTQ plus rights movement in New York City because I can tell this person just really wants some information. Next, don't do it to convince them. Do it to give them the fuller picture, right? So I've written before about the importance of narrative variance on a tour. And I'm going to link in the article version of this a TED Talk all about that topic. That's really great. If you choose not to get into political conversation, if you choose to get into political conversation, you will not be successful if your motive is to change their minds. Like I said before, right? You could plant the seed, but that's it. They are still a paying customer at the end of the day, and you are still a guide on duty. So your motive must be the motive of a guide, which is to give them the full picture of a topic, right? Again, meaning you need to be well-versed in both sides of the argument. So by taking away that unachievable, I want to convince them that, which you've no control over, you can instead control the narrative, making your goal to make sure they are well-informed. And those are very two different approaches to getting into controversial topics. And finally, make it very clear that this is your personal opinion, right? This is important for the tour operators as well. If you are giving a tour for a tour operator, it is very important to remember that you represent their brand on a tour. Even if you're freelance, even if you only give a tour for them once in a while. So before giving your personal opinion, just make it very clear that's what you're doing, right? As aforementioned, you should be aware of the argument to your position, but a simple, now of course this is my personal opinion with lots of fact-based points. Make it very clear that you're speaking as yourself, right? Just announce it. And one little caveat, for those of you saying, but what if I don't want to get into it? Or what if, my tour operator has a very strict no politics rule? How can I get out of a conversation? I say the easiest answer, simply say no. That's a very reasonable answer to give. And maybe you're wording it a little more gently by saying, well, my job as a tour guide is to be objective and to give you the fullest picture that I can. So I want you to be able to come to your own conclusions. Or maybe you just say, I make a point not to talk about politics on my tour. Done. Move on. Again, another way to do it, if you don't want to get into the topic or you don't want to give your personal opinion, just be super, super extremely objective by saying, again, I'm not going to give any personal opinions, but the two sides are this. Side A thinks this, side A thinks this. Side B, right? So making it very clear, these are the two sides and I'm not going to get into it. Or of course, you can also tell them as a rule, you don't talk politics during your tour, but you're happy to hang out after the clock to share more. So maybe you are personally interested in talking about this topic. You could tell the guest wants to know more, but you don't feel comfortable during the tour. Great. Off the tour, make a point. Okay, now I'm off duty. Take off your lanyard or cover your branded shirt, whatever you want to do to make it clear to the guest. And now you can talk about it. Just some extra options. But again, I think there's nothing wrong with getting into these touchy topics if you want to. You just have to make sure you're doing it in the right way.